everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Bottom Line. I'm your host, Lauren Kalil. Our show is brought to you by UCAN. On today's episode, we have training think tank coach Adam Rogers and brute strength coach Matt Torres, both here to discuss the best way to test strength. You both were at the games and recently at Rogue. Matt, you had your athlete Danielle Brandon, and Adam, you were there with Alexis Raptis. At both events, we saw the latter style of strength events, first with the sandbag at the games, then the log press at Rogue. Matt, I'll let you start. Is this a style of strength work that you typically implement in training? And were there specific jumps that you would have to train an athlete to get ready for something like this?
Yeah, it's something that we will test, the months leading up into the competition. It's not something that we really dive into throughout the majority of the year as far as the specifics of the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we look at the ladders, be it a barbell or, some odd object like a log or a sandbag at the games, there's typically, chatter amongst the coaches of, what is the strongest athlete capable of doing? And for really a lot of the things that I write for my athletes, that's the basis of goal setting is, if we can get, example, a snatch of 225 from that we just saw last weekend from Colin Brander, how close can we get to that mark? Because if there is some sort of ladder, that it's going to be within that realm of starting weight. And sometimes starting weight is really hard, like what we saw at Rogue, and there's really nothing we can do about it. And I think for the most part, the CrossFit Games and Rogue, we had no idea that the log was being moved until I think 2 weeks before. And then everyone scattered around to go find a log and try to figure out what can your athlete lift and put it overhead. And then you go, okay, this is going to be where we think things will start to get a little bit difficult. And from there, it's, the ladder for us when we see it is, this is going to test our current strength right now. And you just hope that when it's a big competition like the CrossFit Games, that you've worked on it enough throughout the year.
Adam, what is your structure with training your athletes like Alexis for a ladder style strength event?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely do practices with ladder style events. Most of the time it might be like a speed-based ladder. Sometimes it's sort of like that EMOM every 2 minutes, every 3 minutes, hit a weight at an ascending load. The ladder style setup there with the odd objects, I feel like it might be the best way to test strength through that format, because like Matt says, a lot of the athletes and coaches don't have context around what good loads are to hit for a sandbag to shoulder or a log clean and jerk, whatever it ended up being. So the ladder kind of guides them along the way. I mean, if you were to picture that and put it into like a weightlifting format where each athlete had 3 attempts to find a max load, a lot of those people just have no idea where they're at. What's the most that I can hit on a sandbag? The ladder format allows them to inch their way up. The best are probably going to rise to the top by the end, and hopefully we get a truer, closer expression of their true strength there. So I like the ladder with the odd object stuff based off mostly of that. I think the problem with the ladder format, especially in a competition setup like that, becomes the tie break. So when you predetermine the weight jumps, especially in an implement that a lot of people don't have a lot of familiarity with, you're probably going to get a lot of people going out right at the same time. And so that's one thing that I think that, I mean, hopefully we talk about it a little bit more here, but there's just one thing that we noticed looking back at the sandbag, looking back at especially the log, is people go out at the same time. It's hard to really get a true measure of who was the strongest at the log if you're using the tie break to separate 8 girls who went out at the same weight, So I think that that's something that I got to take into account as they continue to try and implement different tests of strength, is if you have a different format like that, that has predetermined weight jumps, that has a higher likelihood of tie breaks, what is the tie break? Because in that format, it was really like 8 of those girls, they were differentiated by who carried the jerry cans faster. It wasn't who was better on the log. So that's just something that has to get taken into account as they do it. And then I think after they figure that out, if they sort of like smooth out those wrinkles, then that odd object ladder style event, it becomes much more of an expression of strength that I think is going to then end up rewarding the best.
So with the 2 events that we saw so far, both at the games and at Rogue, do either of you have an idea of what a good tie break would be for something that does still test the athlete's strength and can be relative to essentially the score for that event?
Yeah, I mean, I think that well, for one, I don't think that little 10-second jerry can was a good thing. I think that it ended up being so quick. It was basically like that mattered so much by the end, and it was such a different test than the log itself that the discrepancy between those two kind of took away from what they were trying to test. So I think if you're going to try and come up with a tiebreaker, the one thing that I did like that Rogue did, and Matt, you can probably weigh in on this as well, is they did the tiebreak first. So everybody was fresh. They didn't have to stop in between heats and do a different tiebreak each and every time. People might have been coming into that with different levels of fatigue. I thought that was smart. I think that what you need to do, though, is you need to make the tiebreak as similar as possible to this test that you're trying to do. Maybe inside of the window, you have a time window in terms of like whoever hit the last weight the fastest, they're the tiebreak. So if we all hit, the three of us hit 190, it took me 30 seconds, it took Matt 25, it took Lauren 20, you win, you won the tiebreak. So it's still that test of that strength, like you were most efficient at that load, but there's a very clear tiebreaker that went into that. That's what I would want to see out of that. I wouldn't want to see a tiebreak that was measuring something completely different, and athletes had no awareness around where they were at. We didn't see the scoreboard for the tiebreak, so we didn't know, hey, if I go out at the same weight as her, I'm ahead of her, or if I got to beat her on this one because she beat me in the tiebreak. So things like that matter, and they matter in practice and execution, and that's just the kind of things that I'd want to see cleaned up a little bit more.
Yeah, I really like that idea. The length of time it takes to hit the weight, especially when it comes to an odd object, that what they were doing. And with the jumps that they were taking, right? Because they were pretty hefty jumps. And it started off at a pretty hefty bar too. And especially like if you could take that same theory and put it into the sandbag, and the length of time it was taking some of these, men and women to get that sandbag up to their shoulder, I think it could have played a much better role as far as figuring out the test of strength, but also, and this is a big one, timing of an event is, super important. But yeah, I think, all in all, the discrepancy between tie breaks, what the tie break is versus what they're aiming to get out of the event, there needs to be some sort of correlation that actually makes sense, as opposed to, as Adam mentioned, a 10-second sprint with the sandbag is really not the best test.
I mean, it was fun to watch. It was interesting to see. And like I said, I think that it could help the overall momentum of the event. Matt mentioned the idea of timeliness. The other problem with the ladder style event is it takes forever. It takes so long because you've got this bottleneck of like one piece of equipment that you've got to get all of your people through in that time. You got to reset. And then if you're doing tie breaks after each round, that slows things down even more. And then you lose the spectacle of the event, because a lot of the energy that should have gone into a strength test where like you're getting the crowd motivated, you're getting the athletes up and like ready to go, you just suck the energy out when that happens. So I think tie break, making sure that it correlates to the actual test of the strength, but also make sure that it's not taken away from the momentum and the spectacle of the event.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with the length of the event somehow needs to be expedited, but nonetheless, this is the structure that we've seen at least the last two times at two of the major events that we wait all year for. When we're looking at not just the ladder style, but the ladder style with an odd object. Do you guys think that this somewhat evens the playing field? Because as you spoke, nobody really knows what other athletes can do. Whereas like you might know somebody's 1RM snatch or clean and jerk and some of those things that we've had in CrossFit for so long.
I kind of like the, the game inside the game. As a coach, you're having that conversation with the athletes. It's like, we can either go for this or we have to go for that. And as you're watching the field, you could determine, do we need to jump up by 10 pounds or do we just need 5? And that, it's beyond just doing their absolute best. It's also playing the smart game, also being able to keep them in the right headspace as well. So I actually thoroughly enjoy moments like that. And when it's an odd object or, in this instance, a ladder, you really don't have that type of inside of the game, almost like deeper thought process when it comes to coaching.
This episode is brought to you by UCAN. Who can? You can. At least I can with UCAN with one of their easy squeeze pouches that give me the energy I need to get through my workout without causing a crash. When I work out early in the morning but don't want to on an empty stomach because we know mid-wad I'm going to be hangry, I grab one of their super easy on the stomach bars. Chocolate almond butter? Yes please. I may not be a games athlete yet, but UCAN helps me stay focused and energized during my workouts. It delivers steady release carbs for long-lasting energy without spiking blood sugar levels, the key to sustaining peak performance and focus and recording videos like these. Trusted by top CrossFit pros like Scott Panchik and Emily Rolfe, get your hands on these goodies and even save 20% on your first order with our code CHALKUP, link in the description. Now back to the episode.
Yeah, no, I agree. I came from a more of an Olympic weightlifting background, both as an athlete and a coach. And like Matt said, like it's just fun to watch athletes. It's fun to watch the gamesmanship, the Price is Right game. You know, I hit 227. Matt's going to put 227 or 229 on the bar. Like it's always, how can you one up? How can you make those little incremental jumps that combine situational awareness with self-awareness? Like, am I confident enough to take that 1 pound jump and put pressure on somebody else? Or am I aware enough to know that I don't have to beat them? I just have to tie them because that's how the scoreboard works. So that's the different aspects of a ladder versus choose your own weight, is like there's another game inside of that, which inside of this sport, we don't really get to play too often. There's not really too many other areas where you can just like look at somebody else and then base your game plan off of what they just did, because usually the race is happening at the same time, unless you're in a different heat. But if you're out there on the floor with somebody, you see what they loaded on their bar, you know what you can probably load on your bar, you can try and mess with their head a little bit. Like that's just fun. It's just fun to watch the athletes kind of go head to head, maybe talk some trash while they're out there. And I think sometimes the ladder might take away from that just because everybody's doing the same thing. Maybe it's easier to follow. Maybe it's because now, you know, like you don't have to keep track of weights from a prior heat. You don't have to keep track of like who did what on what attempt, who missed what. But yeah, no, I kind of like that idea of it. The idea of leveling the playing field with the odd object, I think, is really interesting, because I think that I'm not alone in saying that I was really surprised by the other girl that was left standing on the sandbag event. Jacqueline Dahlstrom was just so amazing with the technique on that. And it was just really, really cool to watch, because I don't know any other strength event where something like that could have happened, where nobody really knew how to do it. Everybody was kind of learning on the fly. We were all like in the back looking up YouTube videos about how to like pick up a sandbag and put it on her shoulder. And she figured it out. I don't know if it was on the fly. I don't know if they had practiced that before, but it was really cool. So I think that maybe that did level the playing field. Now, obviously, we had the same champion on the female side in both. So maybe the strongest is going to end up winning at the end of the day. But it was still kind of cool to see that happen. I don't think that happens in a classical test where everybody knows their 1RMs, everybody knows their 3RMs, everybody's hit different kinds of complexes. I think that that's a little bit less likely to see one of those like surprise moments like that.
So do you guys think that there is a place, or that we will continue to see 1RMs or even a barbell complex the way that we saw at semifinals sneak into some of these bigger competitions like Rogue, or even next year at the games? Or do you think that this ladder style is a way that the sport is pushing forward in the way of the future almost?
I mean, if I had to guess, I think that it's still probably going to be a mix. I think that with how they're going to define and test strength, they're going to want a mix of things still. They want to make sure that people know how to move a barbell through some of the classical patterns that we've all trained really well. They also want to make sure, and they've been very transparent about the idea of, we want to make sure that you can express your strength through multiple different domains. One of the things that I'd be really interested in is, and this is probably another conversation for event organizers, is you don't have to feel like you're just settling for one strength test in a competition, because as we all know, like strength is a continuum. It's a spectrum. Like there's multiple different ways to define and measure strength. So it doesn't have to be just how much external load can I move. It can also be like, how can I control my body? Can I do 3 different strength tests in the same competition where it's like max hold, L sit, power snatch for 1RM, and then front squat? So now I've tested strength 3 different ways that have 3 different restrictions on the expression. And so now I'm getting a better feel for who is able to express strength across that spectrum of sort of the continuum of speed and strength and body control. That'd be really interesting for me, because then it's less, do you have to get that one strength event really right and make sure that you're getting the strongest or the best measure of it? It's like, no, you can kind of cover your bases with it.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's a higher likelihood of us seeing that versus, the regime that was in place for, the games prior, where, you have one person at the helm, you're going to notice tendencies that start to take place. You know, I think with where we're at right now, we're back in this space where it's like we don't know what we're going to see. We understand that it's kind of taking this shift, but we just don't know what that picture truly looks like. And so it forces us to keep reaching out of these boundaries that we created through the history that we know, and almost getting us out of that comfort zone that we thought we were really good in, and then we come to the games this year, and it's like, holy cow, this is what it looks like now. And so in terms of strength, I guess preparing as if this is exactly how it's going to be, of, we need to have these odd objects. We need to be able to, be gymnastically strong, versus just with a weight in your hand, versus, strong endurance. There's so many different options. And so for, any of the event organizers out there, and I understand the difficulty of trying to put all these things together and then trying to create a spectacle that the audience can enjoy at the same time. So I hope, just judging off of the games this past year, I hope that they continue to drill in, practice the events. You have an entire year to get this thing right, to make sure that what they're trying to express is actually being done in the proper way. And if there is, issues where events cannot be ran, you're still able to hit what you're intending to hit the first time, no matter what happens, whatever, whether it's weather or, whatever unforeseeable issues that could happen throughout the games.
Is there any downside to these ladders in the sense that it could potentially take away from the athletes by requiring them to make certain jumps instead of testing their own strength relative to them?
Yeah, well, I think so. I think that it's probably a little bit more likely that you don't see a true expression of someone's 1RM strength, because it's probably more likely that people are going to go out sooner than they would have if they had experience with the odd object, if they knew what their jumps were going to be. And just sort of knowing that if you can't pick your own, I've kind of got to climb the ladder with everybody else. Maybe I was capable of 3 more steps after everybody else went out, but I stopped there. We saw Spiegel go over and lift the wood log after everybody was done, just for the show of it.
Casual.
Who knows if there was somebody else there pushing her, who knows how heavy she could have gone that day. And maybe it would have been fun to watch. It maybe would have taken another 30 to 40 minutes to figure it out. But I think that there is probably a bottleneck that exists on the expression of strength in that format, just based off of those predetermined jumps. The problem, though, I think, with the other way, so say that it's a weightlifting event and they have 3 attempts at a snatch, or at the games, the team competition for the snatch was 2 attempts each at split jerk and front squat, I think. You're not really getting a true expression of strength with 2 attempts at a split jerk after a 20-minute corral. So in that one, it's even more like you're probably not really testing strength. You're probably testing somebody's ability to hit as close to their 1RM as possible, and their self-awareness to know what they can hit in that situation. So I think that there's bottlenecks in either way. Number of attempts limited probably puts a bottleneck on how close or aggressive somebody wants to go. Or if you have everybody take the same jumps, probably the strongest person there isn't going to get to go as heavy as they really could have. But maybe it doesn't matter. Like if the scoring is just first place, second place, third place, then it doesn't matter how heavy they actually could have gone that day. If it is something like the Z scoring that we saw at Zealous Games, maybe Danny wants to go a lot heavier because then she can separate herself even more. So it's kind of like all those variables you got to take into account.
Yeah, I think as long as they can find the correct ways to eliminate as many tie breaks as possible, nothing's more of a headache to see 8 people with the same score. And just, I guess, like kind of regurgitating what we were saying before is, if you can eliminate it in the proper way, I think that it'll create a better event. How that's said to be done is unknown currently, with whatever events are coming up. I guess Wodapalooza has something to consider, to make sure that at the end of the day, at the end of the weekend, we're seeing who's the current fittest at that time.
Adam, we'll start with you. What is your bottom line? Is it better to test the ladder, or is it better to test a 1RM?
Oh man, I think it's context dependent. I think that like I said, I can see pros and cons for either. I think the pros of the ladder style probably exist a little bit more on the odd object, where people might not know where they're going to go. They might not know what the other athletes are capable of. They wouldn't even know what to select if you said, "Hey, go figure out what you can 1RM on a log." So I think there's value inside of that. I think for some of the more classical tests like snatch or clean or even like a CrossFit total where people know where they're going to be at, it probably makes for a better show to let them just select their own weights. I think you're going to get closer to a true expression of strength in that format. And it's probably going to make the event run a little bit smoother. And because the ladder style, it's just so hard to squeeze everybody through each station one at a time. And then let alone what we had said earlier with the high probability of tie breaks that happen with that format.
Matt, what's your bottom line?
Yeah, I agree with Adam on that last part. Is these athletes should have their weights organized prior to stepping out there if they want to get, a true expression of what they're capable of doing out there. And so in that regard, I think it'd probably be better to get them to step away from the ladder. Does it need to be like that? Always? No. And there's so many different ways to do it. It's going to be interesting to see the blend of how they can create that, allow these athletes to be prepared, have their numbers situated, but also make it a spectacle for the audience and the viewers out there. So our sport can be taken more serious, and at the end of the day, create a more reliable source of income for these athletes as well.
Matt, Adam, thank you guys so much for joining us. Really great conversation. I love both of your minds and the ideas that we brought to the table. So I appreciate it. And we'll see you guys next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you.